mean, it's such a unique sport. One of the things I wanted to ask you, and I'm really always so curious about, is you're a natural bodybuilder,
Mm-hmm.
and you have such dedication. What made you say, you know what, I'm staying in this natural space. I'm not going to be an enhanced guy. Enhanced means steroids for friends at home
Yep.
who don't know what it is. And again, no judgment whatsoever, but for you to stay in that lane, it's so intriguing to me because you have to have all of that dedication. I don't want to get myself in trouble and say, more or less than a pro, but in the enhanced world. But how did you stay in that lane? Was it a health and wellness choice, or how did that happen for you?
It's a good question. And I think the first thing I will say is that the decision to use anabolics outside of bodybuilding is actually quite different than the decision to either decide to use it in bodybuilding and go the enhanced tested or untested route. The reason I say that is that most people who want to develop a certain physique, they're kind of like, why not use steroids? And then they decide based upon the health and wellness component. And that is often their principal concern, or more often, depending upon the country they're in, the legality of it and the financial risk. And the fact that there's an interaction between the two. Like if it's illegal where you're at, you're probably getting it illicitly, and you should have very little confidence in what you're actually purchasing being what it actually is. And in fact, there has been research on this where a shockingly high proportion of a certain type of anabolics is actually something else.
Yeah.
So you're literally playing with your health, even if you are doing it in a responsible way, because I've got the dosages right, I've got the doctor looking at my blood work, but yeah, that's not actually what you think you're putting in your body. And by the way, it wasn't done to pharmaceutical standards; it was made in a bathtub, right?
Yeah,
so
right in the basement.
yeah, so that decision, I think we need to take a look at and be like, okay, cool, that's what people might be doing outside of a competitive context. But in bodybuilding, and you could even argue, okay, look, I can see two guys who are gym rats, neither one competes, similar
Right.
physique, we can assume average genetics. The guy on gears has an easier time. You could argue it's a shortcut, but who cares? They're not competing. They want to achieve an outcome. Why
Right.
wouldn't I do this? That's their choice. That's probably how they see it. I don't actually think it's easier to achieve a high-level enhanced physique in competitive bodybuilding than a high-level natural physique. And in fact, you might be able to argue it takes more, maybe not dedication, but at least sacrifice, because it's a whole nother variable that you're now managing. Yeah. While WBF Worlds is highly competitive, and I placed 7th out of 9th in my class, that wouldn't translate to placing 7th at the Olympia if I was enhanced.
Absolutely, yeah.
I would probably be maybe middle of the pack. If, let's say I was taking all the enhancements in the world, just from what I know of being involved in the sport for over 20 years, I think I would be a bottom tier IFBB pro, right? Not a 7th place Mr. Olympia person. Because if you're top 10 in the Olympia and the IFBB, you're one of the best bodybuilders in the world. So I want to just make that distinction clear. But let's say I was on all this stuff and I was doing everything that an IFBB pro who's trying to get as high as a placing as they could in the Olympia, I'd probably be competing at like 250 pounds,
Yeah, I mean, at your height?
Yeah, right?
You're a tall dude.
That's a 75-pound difference that we're talking about. Man. So when you think about the polypharmacy that requires, the health risks that you're dealing with from that, the changes in your mental health state, which I think Mike Israetel has done a great job talking about.
First of all, you did a fantastic interview with him a couple of months ago. One of the things with Mike Israetel, like you kind of said, is he's so transparent about it, whereas you don't see that all the time.
Mike Israetel does a great job of being very agnostic about the choice, not moralizing it, but also making sure people have informed consent around the decision to stay natural or not. So as a competitor, when you decide, do I want to go enhanced or not, I think there's a lot of things that go into it. Some people decide or think they decide, but it really has much more to do with their environment. And when I first got into bodybuilding, natural bodybuilding was not as well known. It hadn't been, popularized on the internet. The first person to do that for me was actually like Lane Norton, who at the time, before he was known as a power lifter, and before he was Dr. Lee Norton, but actually still doing his PhD, I knew him as Straight Flexed on the bodybuilding.com forums.
Wow.
That was his handle. And he was doing his PhD, competing in natural bodybuilding, and he had a series called Inside the Life of a Natural Pro. And I think he turned pro in the mid-2000s, right around the time I started paying attention to the sport of bodybuilding. But for me, my first exposure to bodybuilding was, Ronnie Coleman, Jake Cutler, that era. And
I'm your age, me too.
Yeah, so I literally did not know about natural bodybuilding until I got exposed to it. So someone who was considering competing, I was starting to go down the pathway of, how do I rationalize this? Because I didn't really know there was another avenue. And I remember watching the HBO Real Sports documentary where like the folks from muscular development, like John Romano at the time, were like, where are the bodies? And I was like, yeah, where are the bodies? There's no risk to this stuff. It's just, receding hairlines, some acne, it'll be fine. Not realizing that, low dose TRT is not the same thing as, spending $4,000 on gear every month.
Yeah,
and
that's financial, right?
I was going down that pathway because I was interested in competing and I was trying to feel out whether I wanted to do that. And once I finally did get exposed to natural bodybuilding, and I went, oh, there's a way for me to go and create a competitive landscape that doesn't require that. I was interested. I wanted to look into it more. And I found that for me, knowing myself, that I become quite obsessive about whatever I do. I get very passionate and I put all of my energy into the one thing that I'm super excited about. I knew that if I was training as effectively as I thought I could, if I was following my nutrition as effectively as I thought I could, but I wasn't getting to the competitive outlet or level that I wanted, the thing that you can always do more of is take more gear. so I was I was concerned about my personality interacting with kind of the no holds barred polypharmacy chemical warfare that I had seen many people engage in. And there are some examples at local shows. If you ever attend an NPC show, you watch the super heavyweights, guys who've been trying to turn pro for years, and they look big, but they don't look good, and they're probably taking 3 times the gear that your average IFBB pro person is taking at the same body weight. And you're just like, wow, I don't want to be that person. So to me, the choice was related towards putting some guardrails on my personality. And I'm mostly interested in maximizing my potential regardless of the constraints. I don't have a desire to get to 250, 275 pounds, but it's the aesthetic choice is less, like I don't really have a desire to get to 200 pounds like I am now. I was fine with my body. I never felt the need to be like, oh, I'm small, I got to be bigger. So for me, it was more like I really love lifting. I like the process of trying to chip away at this goal that gets increasingly hard, like the climbing of Everest type of deal. And I don't really care if, Everest is boosted up by Anavar or if it's just where it's at for my genetics. But I want to climb it. And then once I made the decision, then it was an easy way to go. Like I was tempted to go the enhanced route early on because I was potentially, that's the only way I knew bodybuilding was. But once I had made the decision to go, the drug-free route, then it was like, okay, easy. What are the banned substance lists? Cool. Do I fit into that? Oh man, I did use pro hormones in 2004. I got to take, I just looked at it very objectively. Like, what are the rules? I'll follow them because it's nice to have some constraints.
That's just fascinating because that's the kind of thing that must be so personal. You guys, everyone looks at it. I remember just seeing Arnold when I was very young. We're about the same age, and I remember watching Pumping Iron, which at that time was still an old movie, but I really enjoyed it. And in the beginning, it's like, how the heck did this guy end up looking like this? And then, like you said, as you learn a little more, you start to maybe set those guardrails for yourself.